What's the topic of your thesis?
It's basically on like faith, and so it's kind of looking at the decline in religion, and particularly, some of the research is really interesting that even though Protestantism is probably like one of the most declining religions in the United States, evangelical Christianity, which falls under the umbrella of Protestant, is not. But then there's, a lot of texts and books and memoirs and things kind of coming out that that you would indicate that there's like this mass exodus from evangelical America. And so it seems like it's, very much like a niche set of folks that are leaving, and they're leaving quite loudly. And most of them are going into becoming identifying as nuns, as like no religion whatsoever.
Oh,
And so like, yeah,
very.
NONES. and and so a lot of the reasons why they're like that I'm finding that they're leaving is things like non-acceptance of LGBTQ plus peoples, kind of the overly conservative politics, um, and then just kind of doctrinally how evangelicals view the Bible and the doctrine, and how they kind of put that on to other folks. And so, kind of the basis of the thesis is that there's actually a landing spot for those people, opposed to like throwing out religion altogether. That Buddhism, and very in particularly Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, is a good landing spot because it's kind of the antithesis of those things. And so, just even like how Buddhism and Jodo Shinshu defines faith compared to Christianity and evangelical Christianity is quite different. And so, kind of this sort of hope and push to identify for folks that there's something out there besides nothing.
Yeah. What a fascinating thesis. And this is for your Master's of Divinity at the
Yeah,
Institute of Buddhist Studies? Okay.
yeah, yeah,
Um, wow. And I know that you have yourself have kind of experienced some of the things that you're researching and analyzing for your thesis,
yeah,
where you've come kind of from a Christian evangelical background and then found yourself in Jodo Shinshu. Is your personal experience going to be represented in your thesis, or is it maybe towards the
yeah.
end or something like that?
No, it won't be represented in the thesis, just because it has to stay like maintain a research project. But the hope is to kind of take the basis of the research project and then turn that into like maybe more of a manuscript for something that would include my personal journey in it, and kind of integrate that into the research, and so kind of beyond the thesis. So
Wow. Because I know you also have a creative writing background, so
yeah,
that's perfect. Oh, that's so great. I mean, it's a heavy topic, right? Like this
yeah.
kind of this people full on writing off religious activity or religion itself, but not without reason, right? Like they're
Right.
disappointed in something. Um, and so, if you don't mind, I would love to kind of talk about some of the things that you're finding as you've been researching.
Yeah,
And
sure.
is there like a particular evangelical um, group that is surviving a lot of this right now, or is that more outside of your research where you're mostly looking at people that have come away from it?
I mean, it's a little outside to some extent, but what I am finding, like the Pew Research points to the folks that are staying are white evangelicals. And so, not just LGBTQ folks, but people of color are also leaving. And that's where some of the downturn has been. And so but part of like one of the things that I'm kind of questioning within my own research is, who actually defines themselves as evangelical. And so this has also been kind of part of the difficulty with the research on like mental health and religion. And it's only been like, it hasn't really been that long, maybe like last 20 or 30 years that like they've defined like this is evangelical Christianity, like these are the criteria that somebody would have to say like yes to be included in certain like research and surveys. And so like from my own personal experience, and that's what kind of made me ask the question, is when I was in intervarsity in Christian fellowship, that was a college campus group, they didn't define themselves as evangelical, they defined themselves as non-denominational. And so, but everything that the organization does and the way that it believes and proselytizes is very much in line with evangelical Christianity. And so, I think that that would be kind of part of my question, is like how many folks actually are like, oh, I'm evangelical versus, I was in that group and then I went to a Foursquare church and, it identifies as Foursquare, not as evangelical. And so, I think it's not until you kind of start to put two and two together, of like, oh, I am in an evangelical denomination, and I didn't know that I would have defined myself as evangelical. But once I saw the criteria, I was like, oh yeah, I mean, I would say yes to, all of these, and like heavy proselytizing, the Bible is inerrant, there's no flaws in it, the flaws is us. So I think that it wasn't until kind of seeing that sort of stuff that is, yeah, it's not as cut and dry, I think, for some folks.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing where, the label more or less is just that. It's just that label.
Yeah.
And when you were, engaged in what we'll describe now as an evangelical, group or groups, was evangelical kind of considered a bad word, or was it just not a word that was used at all?
It definitely, like, I don't recall it being a bad thing. Like when I was part of the church, I think that, it's this thing. I really there's like one of the uh research papers that I have, it talks a lot about like kind of evangelical America and like the Trump era and like kind of how it colored that sort of like the view in the country of that particular group. But even if you go back to like Billy Graham, who, is one of the early like evangelical ministers that really put it on the map, I think in the way that he preached and his style, like a lot of people, I think, were enamored with it. Like, he was this like clean cut, handsome guy. He was really like talking about, America and changing, how people relate to the Bible and live their life as, these, kind of on fire for Christ, kind of believers. Um, and and as it kind of continued to blossom, and the way in which it has entered evangelical Christianity has entered politics, and the way that it's turned the tide in so many directions. I mean, I think that we were going that direction whether Trump shows up or not, but I think that there's a way in which he kind of epitomizes what people dislike about evangelical Christianity, which is, you have a lot to say on how people should live, yet you're not walking the walk. And I think this is too like the people that have left the tradition. You see a lot of or I don't even know statistically if we could say it's true or not, but like the people that have had affairs or have done inappropriate things, have been accused of sexual abuse, they have very much been in the limelight. And so I think all of that also colors how people feel about it. But I think more than anything, I think people are far more willing to talk about their experiences. And, and it's not just book experiences where people are sharing it. They're sharing it on podcasts, they're sharing it, on social media, all of these outlets. So I kind of wonder how much that plays into it too, that you finally have like a place that you can connect with other people. You're finding out you're not the only one that was experiencing this sort of life. Uh, because when you're entrenched in it, like those are all the people you're spending time with, right? So like you don't know anything better or different. Um, and it's not to paint anybody who's in it as stupid or anything like that. It's just it's that sort of indoctrination that can happen in any group where you're encouraged not to go outside of your group.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, and I appreciate your kind of empathy, or your kind of extending some like grace for some of these people that are finding themselves being indoctrinated, whether they know it or not. And was that kind of your experience? Like, did you kind of grow up in a community? Like, was your family or was your community from the get involved in these types of groups, or was it more Christianity, Catholicism, and then you kind of found yourself go into those
Yeah, it
evangelical
was
groups?
it was a slow burn. Yeah, no, I was raised Catholic.
Mm,
And my mom was kind of like the devout Catholic in our family, and then when she got remarried to my stepdad, he was also Catholic, and a good chunk of his family was. So, we just kind of always practiced Catholicism. And when I was in high school, I started kind of having some questions, and then you know I think like most people, when if there's space to question what you've been raised in, you're gonna take it when you have the opportunity. I think and so that's kind of what happened when I went to college. There was space to question, and so I went into college just like, I'm not gonna do anything with church. I'm not sure I want to be Christian. I don't think I want to be Catholic. And I had never I was the first in my family to go to college. And, it was a difficult experience, moving away from home. I chose to move 250 miles from home. So, like, far enough that I wasn't seeing my family on a regular basis, but close enough that I could get home if I had to. And so it was really lonely. And I think that this is something that, InterVarsity at the time was doing really well is, they were doing Bible studies in dorms. So each dorm they placed Bible study leaders there that are students. And there's a lot of like befriending that happens. And then like once you kind of start with Bible study, then it's like, oh well, we do this worship service on Thursday nights. Like, why don't you come to that? And so then you start going to that, and it just slowly starts to take up more and more of your time if you allow it to, which I did. I was starting to make friends in that space. And so then you start to watch other people leave, and as soon as they leave, like, they're like ostracized. And you don't see them anymore because it gets painted as like, oh, we're so busy doing all this stuff, like I don't have time to hang out with them. It's not that they did anything wrong, and so by the time, it felt like, oh, maybe I have some bigger questions about Christianity. My entire friend group was like in this. I had become a Bible study leader. I had learned how to play guitar, so I had become a worship leader. So I was just very like entrenched in it. And then when so like InterVarsity asks people to come on staff with them when they graduate. And so up until right before, like maybe like 6 months before I graduated, it had always been said that I was going to be asked on to staff with InterVarsity. And I remember talking with the staff person, and they're like, actually, we're not going to invite you on because we're not taking white women onto staff any longer. And it was kind of strange because up until that point, InterVarsity had been counting me as a minority in their census because I'm part Native American. And so I was like, so when I kind of pushed back against it, it was it was privately told to me, well, it's actually, the concerns that came up are, we think that you're gay, and you're overweight, and it's not godly for to be overweight. And so because of that, that's why we're ultimately not inviting you onto staff. And when I say staff too, like I have to say, like, you have to fundraise for your salary. Like InterVarsity doesn't pay you your salary. Like you have to call up your friends and be like, hey, will you support me for $50 a month, or however much. So there's there's a whole nother component that I don't often talk about. So when all of that happened, I was pretty devastated. It's like, I didn't really, I'd put so many eggs in that basket, um and so I had been on Sundays going to a Foursquare church in Spokane. I was out in Cheney, Washington. Spokane's like a 25-minute drive from Cheney. And so I'd go to this Foursquare church that was very similar to InterVarsity. So when I left InterVarsity and I graduated, I moved up to um like within a short drive of the church. And so I just kind of doubled down and got involved in the church. And the whole time little questions are starting to rise up. And I thought it was a different place. I wasn't smart enough to connect my experience that had happened in InterVarsity with what was happening at the Foursquare church. And um, just to make a long story short, my now wife and I we met, and so then when I came out, I was asked to either break up with my wife and move in with the pastor and his wife and get therapy, and then and not to see my wife at all, or to leave the church. And so ultimately left the church. And then at that point I started to realize, oh, there is a specific type of Christianity. Like this is a specific type. And I didn't have a lot of exposure to other types of Christianity. Being raised Catholic, my parents were very strict Catholics. I wasn't allowed to go to other people's churches. We always went to our church. And so uh yeah, I mean, I think evangelical Christianity is like the complete opposite of Catholicism. And it like just didn't dawn on me that maybe there had been something better fit for me other than what I was doing.
Yeah. It's the opposite from Catholicism in that like Foursquare churches would be all right with you going to another Foursquare church or to another type of Christian church.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always dependent. I think on the pastor and how they feel. It's not uncommon in evangelical Christianity for people to kind of church hop. And then it's kind of built into the structure too, because if the temple or the temple, I'm already into Buddhism.
Yeah.
If the church gets too big, they'll actually have a team of leaders plant a new church. And so they'll take like a group of leadership and head out and like start a new church. So it's not uncommon then for a group of people who are attending that church to also go to bring the numbers down to allow for other people to come into that popular space and create a new popular space. It's really kind
Wow.
of fascinating.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's coordinated and it sounds like it works. Like it's like a yeah.
yeah,
I just had a couple questions and thank you for sharing because I know a lot of this is devastating. It's like you're recounting some really heavy stuff, so I appreciate you going into it. I was curious when you weren't getting promoted to staff. I was curious, like, what staff means that you are fully part of the organization, like the leadership of the organization for
yeah.
for regional things. Is that
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, InterVarsity is broken into regions, and so Cheney, where I went to school, fell into like the Northwest region. So it included, I think, like Washington, Oregon, like one of yeah, it can't. I think Alaska as well. And so what would happen is like when you were asked onto staff, they would send you to another university that they had uh InterVarsity chapter established at. And so you would live off campus because you're not a student anymore. And you would basically take the student study leaders and you would lead them and kind of lead a chapter as this kind of technically volunteer employee that's fundraising for their salary. And then you could work your way up into the organization. And so, they had like regional directors and those sorts of things.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So it is like it's a very coordinated, uh, systematic, hierarchy and having it all broken up into different like leadership regions and
Yeah.
everything like that. It's very, yeah, it's just good to know what was meant by staff. And then
Yeah.
when they said, that we think you're gay, did you know for yourself at that time that you were what that rang true, or was it more like you think that I'm, is that what you think that I am? Like, I don't know if that's
Yeah.
accurate. Yeah,
Yeah, it was more the latter. Between between intervarsity and then like school, I wasn't dating. And it's also, like intervarsity being part of kind of this evangelical movement was very, you don't even kiss before you get married. Like a very like purity culture sort of place. And so, some people dated. If they dated within the organization. It's very unusual if somebody dated outside of InterVarsity. And so, I was just happened to be with a group of friends that nobody was dating. I think like one of our friends was dating another person, but aside from that, that was kind of it. So it's not like you're just even really thinking about it, right? You're just being told that like relationships are real bad. You have to be real careful all the time. And so like I hadn't really come to a place of really considering it.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that must have been quite a shock too, where it's like, well, wait a minute, I thought we weren't even supposed to be thinking about this. I thought it was like bad news, even if what?
Yeah.
Like,
It's kind of like, well, we don't have a conversation about this?
yeah,
Like oh, okay.
yeah, huh,
Because that's the other thing too, is like when you're a student Bible study leader in InterVarsity, you have this thing called discipleship. And so where you're meeting with like one of the senior uh instructors or whatever, right? And like it's like Christian counseling, like once a week or once every couple weeks or so. And it's like it's not like there's not ample opportunity for someone to bring that up with you. So
yeah,
yeah,
suss it out and
yeah,
not just assume things.
yeah.
But then again, it might be like talking to HR, where if you say anything, then they'll be like, "Well, actually, I know. Now I'm going to go tell everyone else what happened." Well, and I was just curious, what is a Foursquare church? Is that is that something unique
uh,
to its own name? Yeah.
yeah, my understanding of Foursquare is that it's just like founded out of like some southern state, like Alabama or something. And so it's just kind of a denomination of evangelical Christianity. Um, it was kind of, I never really thought too much about it. It's just that it called itself a Foursquare church. Um, I think that it's kind of very much like most of the churches that kind of sit outside of large organizations, it's like the pastor starts the church and has an endorsement from somebody, and then but when they start to age, it's usually like one of their children that take over the church, which is the case with in Spokane. It was Life Center was the kind of the seedling Foursquare church, and then it had all of these offshoots, all of these plants, and so now Life Center is a mega church in Spokane. So they've bought this like massive property. I think they have their own like Christian school now, and so that pastor has started to pass the reins over to his son. And so that like it's just kind of I don't know if he got his education with Foursquare or what. So yeah. Yeah, I probably should have done more research on what it was.
No, no, no. I was just
That's a good
curious.
question.
Yeah, but also too, I mean, you came up in it, right? And like it wasn't totally clear, like, it
Yeah.
wasn't, yeah. And what a just for the sake of an observer and a student of religion and someone that's doing research, it must be a very unique vantage that you have where you saw a seedling that became a megachurch. I don't think that a lot of people get that. That at least
Yeah.
that I talked to, or it's not my experience. Um, and then uh, and then at the Foursquare churches, among among the congregants, that's where you found your wife, or was that where was she in a leadership position, or was it something different?
No, we met at work.
Oh, okay.
So I was had started as a milieu counselor for a inpatient drug and alcohol rehab center for teens, and my wife was my trainer. So she likes to tell people that she trained me, and so it's like her favorite. Yeah, so we were friends for we were just coworkers for about a year, and then we were friends for another year before we started dating. And so that has kind of its own arc and story because she went to like Bible college in Canada, and so this was something that we had to contend with early on in our relationship.
Wow. Wow. And I know this is like very much personal territory, so we don't have to go anywhere that you don't want to. But it is a very unique. I'm glad that you found each other and that you both kind of at the same time ish, or it sounds like part of your relationship is hearing each other and having a common like a common experience, like as like
Yeah,
a
yeah,
somewhat of like something that you both can have, your own unique journeys on, but you the share something that is shared like that. Um, wow, that's amazing. And then so you both left that, your respective Christian communities together. And then what was that like as soon as you decided to walk away from Foursquare? Was that something where you were like, I'm starting over a friend group again? I'm starting.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean we definitely lost it was it was a little bit more than just losing the Foursquare square community, because, like, I still had friends that I was in touch with from InterVarsity, like, those longtime friendships, and, at the time, all but about one of my friends from college, stopped talking to me, and so, um, I had one friend who, kind of was like, "No, I'm gonna do this process with you. Like, I love you. Not too sure about the other stuff, but we'll figure it out." And then from the church point of view, like we had somebody stop by our house with a life ring from their sailboat, like offering it as like this is God reaching out, this is Christ reaching out, like offering you safety and come back to the church. And then, we would run into people around town and they would just turn and walk away and go the other direction. And,
Jeez.
like it was very painful. And so, yeah, we kind of the bottom fell out of a number of our relationships. I left, I think probably, today what happened to me at the rehab facility. I think that it was probably some harassment. My hours suddenly got cut. Uh, my wife's supervisor suddenly was, writing her up for being 2 minutes late, and where stuff like that hadn't happened before. And so, we just kind of there was yeah a lot of repercussions I think to it. And then, it was that kind of that question of like, do we even want to be involved in a church anymore? I think my wife much more so than I did. So we went and we checked out some churches that were, saying that they were LGBTQ affirming. And at the time, it just felt like a lot of pandering. Like we'd go in for a service, and it was just like a little too hard directed at LGBTQ. Like one of the songs was like, "We're all rainbow children in God's eyes," and I was like, "I can't do this." And so we found a church that we thought maybe we would like, and then um, the associate pastor had asked me if I would volunteer on their worship team, and because she had found out that I played guitar and hand drums, and I said, I'm just not in a place to serve right now. Like I'm still trying to figure out even if I want to be Christian, much less like, serve on a worship team. And then after that, like she had gone from being very interested in us to like like kind of cold, like and I was just like, well, if you can't say that like you need some space to heal and ask questions, like then this isn't the place for us. Um So I kind of stopped going to church altogether for a while. My wife, I can't quite remember if she was still going or not. She might have just been doing like home Bible study or something. But then we had an incident in Montana with her parents' church at the time. Which, to their credit, they left pretty promptly after this happened. But we were there for a service. Her mom was sick and her dad had taken us. And when we got up to take communion, the pastor, like, who was singing with the worship band, like, mic dropped the microphone and came over and announced very loudly that we were knowingly and purposefully living in sin. And so we were not like welcome to take communion. And so, my wife's father, I don't think he really quite knew what to do. And so he just didn't say anything. And so we went back to our seats and, my wife was sobbing. I had a panic attack. Uh, and that was like the last time I think that was the last time I went to a Christian church. Um,
Wow.
and so and it really precipitated like asking a lot of really hard questions that I had been kind of ignoring up until that point, and that was definitely towards the last straw.
Wow. Gosh, I'm so sorry. That is to be isolated and alienated like that in public like that, and to have it so uh sudden and so violent in its own way. I'm really sorry. That's really, I can't imagine. And then to have, it's shocking for everyone, I'm sure, and then to have your wife's father not be tremendously supportive,
Yeah,
that's difficult. And then the fact that you were able to just sit down in those seats too, and that where you just were treated like that, that's horrible.
yeah,
So it definitely there's a lot of reasons why you probably wouldn't step foot in those types of communities or be hesitant to ever do it again. Wow. Um, Among the hard questions, was it just kind of like, were the questions of I'm a bad Christian, or is like, if I don't have Christianity, then what do I have? Were those the type of questions that were coming up for you?
yeah. That's a good question. I think that it was a lot of things, right? It was like, what's your identity if you're not this? Because you're, even being raised, Catholic, there's still an identity around being a follower of Christ. I think that there's a lot of teachings and the way that the teachings are directed that cause you to ask a lot of questions about the afterlife, like what happens if I don't believe, what happens if I deny Christ, like um when I finally did leave Christianity. I think there was one day where I must have said I didn't believe in God or Christ like multiple times, and my wife was joking and with me and was just like, one more, and like that's the line. You can't do it more than three times, because of like one of the stories in the scriptures of not denying Christ, like one of the disciples denied Christ three times in one day, and so it was this thing of I think feeling kind of untethered and not really knowing, and then also, like, then you have to kind of stop and say, well, like, if I don't believe this, like, what do I believe? I was very fortunate that my mom was a very reasonable human being. So, I already believed in evolution. Like, it was something that, like, I tried to kind of, like, for me, I think the way I kind of taught myself as a kid was, oh, well, God started like the Big Bang. Like God was responsible for the Big Bang. And then like it's just free will kind of takes over, on its own kind of thing. And you don't think about like the deeper questions of like, well, how does that actually, work? And so, I did have some science to kind of, kind of slide into that I was comfortable with. But yeah, it was kind of like trying to figure out like what do you do with day-to-day life? What do you do with your Sunday if you don't go to church? And especially like in evangelical churches, you're usually there like three times a week. Like it's a huge part of your life. And so it was like, what do you do with all this time as well. What do I replace it with? And I think that that was the other part that was really difficult, was trying to figure out, like, what do I do now? Um, and then there's this other aspect too of, like, my wife and I connected over our faith. And so, like, what do we do when that's not there anymore too? And so, yeah, it was really uncomfortable for a while, for quite a while.
Yeah. Did that moment in Montana, did that kind of set off questions for your wife as well, where you both were like, well, what, because like there was a basis of a shared basis of faith that you had. Was that question also happening at the same time, or was there kind of like a little bit more of a drip in a slowness on your wife's part or your part?
Yeah, I think that there was a real slowness for her.
Mm,
I think that she was able to separate more, like, the teachings versus the people. And that was kind of one of the questions I had to struggle with too, is like, am I leaving Christianity or am I leaving Christians? Like, because they're two often very different things.
yeah.
Um, for her, I think that she kind of had her own journey with it. So even when I started going to the temple, uh and she would come with me, but she wasn't identifying as Buddhist at all. And I remember we went to a Northwest convention several years after we had been part of the Spokane Buddhist Temple, and Reverend Hirano from Salt Lake City, Utah Temple, was giving a presentation on Christianity and Buddhism, because him and his wife, living in Salt Lake, have, it's a very strong Mormon population, and a lot of the Buddhist members who were raised in the temples actually don't have a lot of understanding of Christianity, which absolutely blows my mind even still. Um, and so he was kind of giving this presentation, and one of the things he said was, if you could prove that, like, Christ did not exist, Christianity falls apart. But in Buddhism, if you prove that Buddha wasn't a real person, Buddhism still stands on its own. And we we had driven ourselves over, and so the temple had taken a bus. So they head out, and we decided to go to Portland for a couple days. And I remember driving to Portland and saying to my wife, I was like, huh, how do you feel about what Reverend Hirano had to say? Um, and because she was still identifying as Christian at that time, and she was like, I don't want to talk about it. And I was like, oh, this touched on something,
Yeah.
like this. Because there's these questions, these things that when you're in something, like, you just don't stop to ask the question. And, like, it kind of blew my mind, it blew her mind, and I think that, I don't know, I'd have to ask her, but for me, I think that that was kind of one of the moments that she started, like, huh, maybe I don't believe this anymore.
Wow. Um, yeah, and I think that, I mean, how brave to for you both to sit in the uncomfortableness of evaluating your faith, where you should put it, and whether or not it's worthwhile, what your place is in all these things. Because some people, it's too painful to think of the alternative. And both of you, at your own pace, took that time to see what was worth it, what wasn't worth it. And yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like to hear something like that, and to clearly touch a nerve when you ask about it, but it was it hit something dead on that was otherwise not a question. It
Yeah.
wasn't, really wasn't a thought. Wasn't allowed to be a thought. Wasn't a thought just because of faith or just because of the strength. And then what does that do to you? Wow. But it is it's amazing too, and we'll get into this, is like what these moments have led to you to become, and what you've been able to do as you kind of more so started walking a Buddhist path, has been it's been so helpful, and especially as a leadership role, you've been able to give a voice to more people to be able to turn to Jodo Shinshu and turn to your organizations, that allow an opportunity for people to have these thoughts and these conversations, and also to find something that might ring more true for them.
Yeah.
And was that experience in Salt Lake City like the your beginnings into Buddhism yourself, or was there a book that kind of turned you on into it a little bit more?
Yeah, my so we had kind of been going without, any religion for a chunk of time. And life just kind of started getting difficult. Like different things were kind of popping up. Um w- I kind of found I had replaced uh a lot of my free time with drinking and drinking with friends, and just doing stupid stuff. Kind of getting to live that time that I didn't get to live. And so it started to kind of take a toll on our marriage. And so there was a point where it was kind of like had to stop and kind of evaluate what I was doing, and like where I was going with my life. And so I entered into some therapy, and started kind of dealing with some hard stuff. And kind of part of what came up with that was my therapist was just she was a very astute human being. And she said, people don't you don't have to be religious or spiritual to lead life, but some people are just kind of built that way. And she said, unfortunately for you, you're kind of built to be a spiritual person, and so you're just kind of denying this part of who you are. And so as we kind of talked, and made it very clear I wasn't going back to anything organized religion. And she just said, you know the more I get to know you, the more you sound like a Buddhist. And I was like, oh, okay. And I had some um knowledge and understanding of Buddhism. I had taken Eastern religion in college, and had kind of learned a little bit about it there. But sadly, I slept through a lot of that class. So it was just some basic understanding. And so she's for homework assigned me to go to the Spokane Buddhist temple. And so my wife and we went with another friend to the Bonadori festival that the temple was having. And they do an open house. And so part of what we did is we went upstairs and went to the open house, and it was just the three of us with a minister's assistant. And really nice guy. We're kind of in similar age. And I just asked him, like, why Buddhism? Why did you turn to Buddhism? And because he also wasn't raised in it. And he just kind of described a lot of what I was going through. Was I hit this time in my life where things got hard, and I needed some answers. I needed something beyond me. And then when he was talking about it, he started getting very emotional, and started crying. And I thought, oh, there's something here that he was tall, tall, big dude, cool glasses, like big beard, kind of like your beard, like, and you're like, you're not supposed to be crying, like this isn't the what I've encountered before, and so um when we left, our friend and Becca and my wife, were all like, yeah, let's come back, let's do a Sunday service. And so Becca and I went back the next Sunday, and it was just a very emotional response that I had to the service. It really kind of triggered something inside of me that was unexpected. So I went back to my therapist, and I was just like, yes, I actually like I really enjoyed it, but I don't understand. Like I don't like how do you be a Buddhist? Like how do you learn how to be a Buddhist? And so she assigned me Thich Nhat Hanh's Living Buddha, Living Christ, to help kind of take what I knew and kind of have this parallel to it. Um, and I remember reading the book, and getting really frustrated when I hit, I think there's a section on, it's been so many years since I read it, but a section on like the precepts, like, and kind of comparing and contrasting them to the Ten Commandments. And anytime it went to the comparing part, I was just like, oh, I don't want to do this. This is so like, it triggered stuff, um, so as I was doing reading and kind of struggling with it, I was just really curious as to what that feeling was though that I had when we went to the service. And so that kept me going back to the services. And then uh yeah, it just seemed like every time I thought about leaving, a minister would show up that just had the right answer. Then I never even had to ask. So it was just kind of like it was just meant for me to be there.
Wow. What wonderful guidance you got from your therapist to get these kind of homework assignments, and the courage that you had to trust it and to go ahead and give it a shot. And I was curious, like, so there was this Spokane Buddhist church that you went to first. Well, was there any guidance or reasoning behind that specifically over, I don't know if there was like uh, Vipassana stuff, or if there was Tibetan Vajrayana things, or Zen, or anything. Was there anything else in your environment that you could have explored, or was that kind of like the center of Buddhism that you had that was nearby and that you could go to?
Yeah. Yeah, Spokane's real in terms of what it offers in Buddhism is really small. There are other groups that are around, but it's, if you do a search for Buddhism in Spokane, the Spokane Buddhist Temple is the first one that pops up consistently. There's been some other groups that have popped up now since. There is a Shivatse Abbey out in Newport, but it's like a 45 plus minute drive. Um, and so I remember, Daijaku Kintz from the Institute of Buddhist Studies. She said that she's probably the Buddhist that she is because of where she lived and what was close to her. And had there been, something else that had there been a Jodo Shinshu temple closer, that she'd probably be Jodo Shinshu. And so I think that there is, I and I agree with that kind of like pretty wholeheartedly, but I think there's always some caveats. um, I think that there is a reality that like our causes and conditions bring us to the place where we're supposed to be at the time that we're supposed to be. And that's just kind of how causes and conditions work. Um, but I watched a number of people come in to the Spokane Buddhist temple and it wasn't the right Buddhism for them. I think there's things that because of our karmic conditions, it's not the right fit. And so maybe we do need it to be a little bit harder and need to have that like very strict practice and more there's such variety in all of the schools of Buddhism. And I think they all speak to different parts of us. And I think there's just parts of us that are stronger than others that really connect with specific practices. And so, yeah, I think that Jodo Shinshu worked for me, and it spoke to me, and it hit on those important parts of who I am and how I've been formed. Um, and because of that, like I didn't really feel a need to look outside of that. I did do some. There was a little Zen center in Spokane, and we had gotten assigned that for one of the assignments for IBS to go and go outside of your tradition. And it was fine. I really enjoyed the experience, but I definitely like when I left the Zen center, I was just like, no, I chose right. Like this was the right one for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my knees hurt. This is
Yeah.
like, yeah, that this is not what I'm going for.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, I really enjoyed hearing how you discussed like that the causes and conditions and like people's karmic uh I guess load or context that kind of guides you into the spot where you need to be, even if that spot is temporarily just something you try out like a flavor and then decide to kind of try something else. And that journey is part of what you need to be going through. Because I know that I'm relatively new myself to Buddhism, and I found that Zen is something that I like to click into. But as far as like finding my style of Zen and my thing, I'm kind of honing on that. But there is this kind of like weird guilt that you have, where it's like, well, shouldn't I have picked a lane by now? Like, shouldn't I have like, wait, where's the center that I should go to? What kind of sangha should it be? Like, because there is like a within Buddhist traditions, it seems like across the board, sangha community is super important, and being a person and being around each other is very important. And then if you can't, if your karmic causes and conditions are kind of keeping you from being able to lock in, like it kind of makes you feel like you're not doing it right.
Mm.
Um, but you're but like phrasing it like how you phrase it, like the causes and conditions, well, it's a lot less personal. It's a little bit more like, well, good, good that you get this chance to suss it out, to figure it out. And I'm just so glad that when you got your guidance to go to the Spokane Buddhist church, that you got a chance uh, to feel that connection strongly, but then you also had to kind of dig in deeper. You had to kind of continue going. You had to kind of have that experience. And I was curious about like what that first time was like. So you walk in and people are doing the Nembutsu, and people are doing the way that service is done. Did elements of that feel kind of comforting because of your past within a Christian environment, or was it so refreshingly new in some ways that you were like, well, this kind of feels like a fresh start, and I kind of like what this offers in that way?
It was kind of a mixed bag. When you walk into most Jodo Shinshu temples, pews are present. And this is kind of a byproduct of World War II and the incarceration, and the temple's trying to um, appear more, you know, quote unquote American. And so the pews, I think for anybody who's especially gone to like grew up in the Catholic Church, like just brings back horrible flashbacks, like the kneelers and all those sorts of things. Um, and so uh yeah, to kind of come in as a like a judgy McJudgester outsider, you kind of look at it and you're like, oh, pews, oh, I don't, that's not great to start off with. um and then I think too, like having gone through the experiences that Becca and I had gone through, going to different churches and trying them out as a gay couple, I think you also come in with some armor, just being like anticipating not being accepted. um I can't tell you how many people told us like, oh, no, 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 my pastor's like accepts gay people, like you should totally come. And then you're like, well, okay, but accepting and thinking that there's salvation, like not the same, not the same. And so, so when anybody says like, oh yeah, we're fine with gay people coming, you have this sort of chip on your shoulder of like, yeah, until you show me your true self. Like, yeah, it's just words. It's not like you don't actually, it's not in your doctrine, like to be accepting. And so yeah, like the one of the first things that we kind of noticed was there was another gay couple there, two men that we found out were married. And while we were sitting in the back, the one husband put his arm around his other husband, and like, you as somebody who's like kind of like trying to suss out your safety, you're like you're honing in on everybody around, and like, oh, is anybody looking? Is somebody whispering? Are they getting a side eye kind of thing? Like nobody cared. Like, and then the two of them were both like at the time very part of the temple. And so yeah, so I think in that sense, like it was kind of this weird little beginning mix. And then like you just don't know like how a Buddhist service is supposed to go if you've never been to a Buddhist service. Um and so yeah, everything was kind of a surprise. Some of it was a surprise that made you feel like it was very different and something like you had never experienced, like chanting. And then other stuff was not a surprise and felt a little uncomfortable, like well, some of the recitations, even though it's like Buddhist doctrine, you're like, oh, I remember doing the Our Father in church as a group, and so like this group recitation in general. Um, and then but then like the Dharma talk was really refreshing. It was on impermanence. And so, it was very different than a Christian sermon. And so it was just, yeah, it was just a good experience. I think the surprising part was I had a very emotional reaction to chanting, and something just kind of stirred up, and I started crying actually while we were chanting.
Wow.
Um and so yeah, it was again, like it was enough that it made me want to come back, but it was definitely like the things that's like also like made me ask a lot of questions, like to try to understand. And then, after we'd been going to the Spokane Buddhist temple for a while, we learned about gathas, and which are like Buddhist hymns. Because Spokane doesn't do gathas. There's too many ex-Christian converts, um, that nobody wants to sing them. So while we were visiting like Seattle, we were like, oh, this feels very Christian, to have this sort of, piano hymn like song, but with Buddhist words to it. So that, even that, like now, because where I'm at now does gathas, like, it's been a new learning process and a new coming to understand and appreciate. But I think that like that's a lot of what the journey has kind of shown me, is that I have to get out of what I think, something is. I have to kind of let go of my own baggage and just let it be what it is, and not ask it to accommodate me. But to learn, the different types of practices that my school offers. And it's okay if I enjoy gathas some days and I don't enjoy gathas other days. I think it tells me more about my practice than the gatha does about the gatha. Like, yeah.
Yeah. So is it telling you basically like, well, maybe this is where your attachments are, or this is where your uh like when you say like when you're interpreting whether or not gathas are something that you want to engage with or not, that's kind of like your practice basically saying, uh, maybe this is where I um need to assess and evaluate my openness to things, or is that kind of where it is?
Yeah, I think part of it is like my openness, being willing to recognize that not every practice that I come across is made for me.
I see.
Like I think that there's this way in which when we go into anything, like we want it to completely cater to us. And like and there are people who the gathas are very meaningful for, and that's a way that they're able to understand or express their relationship with their spiritual practice, right? I think for me, at different times too, it tells me where some of my baggage is still hanging out.
Hmm.
That I have some, things that I'm still, kind of working through that come up. Um, I think from like a ministerial point of view, uh, I kind of have questions about um how relative like the Gothas are, because they're kind of dated, um and and so like I want to have space to ask those questions, but I do need to be very aware of like where my own mindset is coming from. And do I want to update or change them to be more pleasing to me? Do I think it makes it more relevant to other practitioners? Like, you can start engaging with it in a different way than just I don't like that. It reminds me too much of my past. Like we can get
Yeah.
past that and start asking some bigger and different questions.
Yeah. Well, that's a great way of like looking into something that otherwise is not your taste, not your flavor, and trying to still get something, get a practice element through it, or observing it as practice. And I was curious when so At what point when you were attending services did you start realizing I want to start leading these? Like I want to not only be a committed Sangha member, but I want to start to offer what I have to this community.
Um, yeah, it's kind of difficult to pinpoint the exact moment. Because one of the things that like I heard being said a lot at the Spokane Buddhist temple is like you need a teacher. You need like, coming to Sunday service is great, but you have to dig into the teachings, and you're best to do that with somebody else, somebody who can help guide you and who knows more than you do. But Spokane didn't have a resident minister, and they did offer workshops, but they were kind of limited. I think I probably took Intro to Buddhism like 5 times, and I just kept taking it over and over again. And we'd have visiting ministers that would come and do like a 1 day workshop, and I would take those. But it wasn't quite enough, and so the way to get to learn more was to become a minister's assistant. And so I asked about becoming a minister's assistant. Um, I did feel like, because we were shorthanded at the temple, that I had enough interest to maybe be helpful, and then to also like get that as like an advantage point to get to learn more. And so I got to study with the Tokodo minister that was there, an ordained minister who was a volunteer. And then I signed up for the correspondence course through the Jodo Shinshu Center, and then they offered minister's assistant trainings, and so I'd get to come to Berkeley and like really dig in and learn, and Dr. Plum would come from UC Berkeley and do some teaching, and Dr. Matsumoto, and so it was just like this opportunity to like just kind of really soak it in. And then I really enjoyed being able to start to give a hand at the temple and kind of fill in some of the gaps that we were having, so that other people could encounter and experience the Dharma as well. Um, and as I started on the coursework and the different things, like it just kept kind of slowly changing, like how engaged I wanted to be with the temple, how I wanted to give back, and how I wanted to receive as well. Like I can't take away my own selfishness in it as well. Um, but a couple different things happened, and one of them was just being able to go to Tokudo ordination. And so up until like Tokudo, I had decided, you know, I wanted to continue to give back to the temple. I wanted to keep learning, keep studying, but I had no interest of like becoming a full-time minister or like going further down the path. And the Buddhist churches of America at the time had started to say, if you want to do Tokudo, you have to commit to Kyoshi, so the teaching certificate, and that meant you know finishing the Jodo Shinshu certificate and all the classes that went along with that. And so I was like, yeah, I totally am loving this whole study thing, and I really started to enjoy leading and being a part of the temple. It was such a wonderful group of people, that like it just didn't it felt like kind of a no-brainer to say like, yeah, I'm gonna stay here. I'll help out in the same way that I was helped, and like I'll work full time doing whatever. And so then I went to Tokudo, and that ordination process, it wasn't during the ordination process, it was after the ordination process, that it was such a meaningful experience that it really something shifted. And so I came back, and it just I don't know, I felt like, yeah, I felt like I wanted to really pursue further. And to back up, so before I went to Tokudo and before I started my Jodo Shinshu certificate, I had lost my job that I had had for like 10 years. And it was at that time that I went and talked to Reverend Kusunoki, my supervising minister. And I was like, I think I want to, pursue like being a minister, but I don't want to leave Spokane. Like that was kind of the thing. And so he was like, yeah, let's that. So he was the one that like was like, let's get you in the um the course, the certificate course, and kind of went down that road. And so after Tokudo ordination, it was kind of, I don't know, I had this real Shinron has this saying, like this passage that he wrote about where he talks about like the Nimbutsu gave him so much, is so important to him that he wanted to give back to the breaking of his bones, to his bones becoming dust. And you see this in Shinron's life where like all of these bad things happen to him, yet somehow he keeps returning to teaching the Nembutsu to others. Like it he's such a fascinating person to watch and to read and to learn about and engage with. And so I feel like that was what started to kind of shift for me, was like I really am enjoying this so much that I can't imagine not wanting to give fully of myself and like kind of give back what so many people had poured into me. And so, as it shifted, and we got closer to Kyoshi, and I finally agreed that I would be willing to be transferred after, and that I wanted to go ahead and become a full-time minister if there was a space for me in the Buddhist church.
Where I caught you last was you were saying you finally were able to know for yourself that you would be willing to be uh, uh,
Oh, transfer.
assigned, yeah,
Yeah,
transferred,
sign.
yeah.
Yeah, so it was kind of, yeah, it was finally came to that point that if there was a spot for me in Buddhist churches of America, that I would be willing to be assigned. And it was just this thing of like, I think that that's like when we engage in our Buddhist practice, like, and we just kind of slowly change, like, and we don't really recognize necessarily that it's happening. It just kind of is something that we start to see the results of. And I think that this was kind of the way in which the teachings just kind of impressed themselves on me, that it just felt like um, not becoming a full-time minister would have just been a disservice to all the people who had poured so much into me. I've been so fortunate to have so many wonderful teachers and mentors and cheerleaders along the way, and um, yeah, yeah.
Wow. Well, yeah, I could see how that wouldn't be just the one moment kind of realization. It was just kind of like built upon your curiosity in wanting to learn more. You're wanting to give back, uh, and yeah, like this kind of speaks to that spiritual core that your therapist identified in you. That it felt like the more you double down on this, uh, the more you are, I guess. That it really is an amazing thing. Also, I just wanted to quickly apologize. I think I was saying church instead of temple for Spokane Buddhist Temple. So I'm sorry about
Oh,
about
that's okay.
missaying it.
It's officially registered as the Spokane Buddhist Church, but
Yeah,
they
I knew
informally
that.
go
Yeah.
by Spokane Buddhist Temple. Yeah,
Oh, okay, okay,
yeah,
got it, got
yeah.
it.
Just like a lot of our churches and temples in BCA. So
Gotcha, gotcha. Well, I just
yeah.
didn't mean to be disrespectful.
Oh no,
But
no worries.
Um, and then, what? And are you okay to keep talking just for a little bit longer?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. Because I was curious about like because Tokudo is considered a by some as being a pretty intensive experience. Like, did you find that to be for yourself as well?
Yes. Yeah, there was a lot of tears at Tokido. I was I was I'm gonna say fortunate. I'll say fortunate. I was fortunate to be our group's Han leader. And so when you're the Han leader, you're helping get your folks in your group from like point A to point B. You're making sure that their attire is correct. Like you're kind of like, you're the one that's like on the hook for your group of people. and getting them through their testing, the Kadai, and uh, and there's lots of really funny moments from being the Han leader, especially because I don't speak Japanese, and so we have lots of jokes about my inability to let the instructors know that our group was there and accounted for, and it, very embarrassing, but also hysterical. But it kind of amped up the process though too, because like you already have like your own personal stress of like trying to perform these rituals and recitations and things. Some of them are memorized, some of them are not, and uh, the stress level of trying to like reproduce things that were supposed to be memorized was just impossible. So I was actually like the last, I think, in our class to pass all their Kadai. Had been so worried about helping other people and forgot to take care of my own stuff.
Wow.
uh, but yeah, no, it's a really it's really intense. Like you get up pretty early in the morning. I want to say like we had a 6 a.m. start time, but I was getting up at 5 a.m. in the morning, so that I could kind of get myself ready and be prepared to, get folks where they needed to go and be alert enough to do that. And then you're up until probably about 11 o'clock at night, and you're doing this for, like 11, 12 days. And so it's, it's a mix of, um, like doing the ritual. So like we'd have morning service every day, and the Japanese class was in charge of like leading the morning service, but we're sitting in the gauging, and we're participating as well, and there's instructors pacing around and keeping an eye on you, making sure that you're chanting as well. So even though you're not on the onaijin, you're still needing to perform this complete this ritual as well. And then you go into your own like kind of group time to go through ritual and work with the instructors. And then this is thrown in between testing and then lectures, and so like you're doing multiple lectures a day. And when you're in a so like for the non-Japanese class, like the instructors will give feedback in Japanese to the Japanese students, and then you sit and you wait, and then they leave, and then the bilingual instructors come and then like translate everything that was just said. So you sit through one lecture, and then like you wait for the next part of it to happen, and so it's just very tiring, both mentally, very physically tiring. My you're wearing all of your robes day in and day out. You're not wearing socks, you're not wearing Western shoes, so like my ankles swelled up horribly. So I would like in the evenings be like laying on the tatami mat with my feet up against the wall, trying to get the swelling down. And then it's July, like end of July. No, it was beginning of July because we were there for 4th of July. It was so hot, like so hot. It was upper 80s, low 90s, but the humidity is about the same spot. Some of the training center has air conditioning, some of it doesn't. So yeah, it's super intense. It's like the process of getting there is intense, and then once you're there, it's intense. There's some pop quizzes, like it was, yeah. And oh my gosh, they play these songs in the morning. Like you have to every morning you clean, like you have like a cleaning assignment, and like there's this song that kind of keeps playing, and one of our friends sent it to us like a year after, and it like gives you flashbacks. Like you're just like,
Brings you right back.
oh, it just brings you right back. Yeah, yeah.
Wow. Wow. But even after all that, like you come back and you kind of start realizing, like, if I can get through that, and then a lot of that might have just kind of started to settle, then you start realizing, I can start applying this. Like I can start applying myself into service. That's amazing. Wow. Even when even when you went back, or kind of like making some of these things like pop quiz, like some of these things sound nice. It still didn't sound nice.
It's not nice.
Still just sounded really hard. Uh, wow. And then I have like one last big question, then one like kind of smaller question. But the
Okay.
bigger question is like, how has been your assignment in San Francisco been? Like, how have you liked living here and being a a head minister here and your just general experience?
Yeah. Oh, it's I'll start by saying it's been good. Like it's been really good. But it's challenging too. You know, our temples have such long history. Like, so San Francisco has like the longest history. Like our temple has been here since 1898, and there are all of these like families and connections and friendships that are so entwined and intermixed, and they go back for like generations. So everything between like really positive great stuff to really not so positive great stuff, like it's just rooted in a lot. And so trying to take in that history and try to take in not just the history of BCSF, but also the history of Japantown and how Asian Americans have been treated in San Francisco. So like that history on top of it, kind of the not just the mass incarceration from World War II, but the Nihonmachi eviction that was done in San Francisco that pushed more Japanese Americans out of the community. It's a lot to try to wrap your head around. And so like even, a year and a few months in, it's feel like I'm just, scratching the surface. There's just so much to learn and so many people to meet and to get to know. Um, so that's been exciting and also a challenge. In the temple didn't have a minister for a few years because of COVID and how the previous resident minister's retirement happened. Um, and so it's also continuing to assist the temple coming out of COVID and trying to get things back in order has been its own challenge. And then every temple also kind of does things a little bit differently. So learning how the Bay District does services and different rituals and things versus Northwest District. Um, and then Spokane, because it was such a convert heavy temple, very rarely ever did funeral or memorial or some of the different after passing rituals and memorial services. Whereas here, that's like a large component. And so, typically I do usually about a funeral a month. And so I think this in the year or so that I've been here, I think I've done like I want to say 18 funerals. And so, that is an adjustment in and of itself. Um, but I've also found I think I was a little intimidated by the thought of that coming to San Francisco. But I've really actually I find that I really love and cherish our funeral ritual and our we do a makiago service, a pillow service when someone has either just passed or right before they're passing. And like I think those are the times that I feel like I'm actually doing something helpful as a minister. Um, but yeah, I mean it's a lot to juggle too. Like you're trying to juggle the day-to-day things that are happening at the temple. I do a service out at a retirement home once a month. You have so many meetings. It's so many meetings with so many groups. You have your own internal groups. We have like our affiliates, like Dharma School and youth basketball, like these types of things. And then you have community stuff that's going on, and so I trying to learn how to just kind of ride the wave and just kind of go where the tide is taking me for the day, and um, which is has been outside of my personality, outside of my comfort zone. So learning, it's taught me a lot. And it's helped me kind of see how things just how much less suffering we have when we kind of let go a little bit and don't have to be so in control. And then, I find my own suffering in the things that I'm like, no, I will be in control of that.
This is gonna work.
This
Yeah.
is gonna work. This is gonna
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah. Wow. And then yeah, so it's not like you're just kind of going into a temple and then just taking over those jobs. You're also trying to take in the history, trying to understand what the community is about, how it works. And I think you had shared with me before about how like you don't just like walk in and then start making changes. You have to kind of like
Right.
go in and observe things before you can kind of start seeing, well, that's broken, but that's because this is broken, or like that's good,
Yeah.
even though that part's not good, but that's where that's this thing go according to plan. So we'll figure that out. Um, yeah, that's a huge thing to take on, and it's I appreciate you how you described how it kind of brings you out of your comfort zone, but also how you found that doing funerals, something that you didn't do a whole lot before, you've found to be something that you can kind of cherish in your own way. Uh, that's amazing. And then my last question, I could really talk to you for so much longer, but
Samesies.
oh, good. But for the sake of today, what is there anything that you would want to promote, or a cause or a foundation or anything that you would want to bring to light, bring to attention, or even just like some advice to people that are just kind of beginning or at any stage of their Buddhist path, just some words, or yeah, anything. It could be self-promotion, anything that you'd want to have people know about.
Oh, that's a big one. Gosh, ooh, that's a lot of possibilities. I think that I think probably more than anything, like, uh, I would encourage people to, um, if they're in San Francisco, to come check out the temple. We meet every Sunday at 10 a.m. It's a wonderful community. Really enjoy it. I think it's a very, I think for me, having come from, like, like as we've discussed, like my background in Christianity, the thing that I get so excited about as a minister is our doctrine really does say, our teachings really do say, like, you are exactly who you are supposed to be right now, and you're accepted just as you are. And like, so I would say, like, if that message resonates with you and you just want to go to a place where you can just be okay being yourself, and be like, if you need to hear that, like, you're okay just as you are, like, come check out a Jodo Shinshu temple. And if Jodo Shinshu isn't your flavor, check out another Buddhist temple. I don't know any Buddhisms off the top of my head that tells you, like, you can't be who you are. And I think that that in our world today is just a really refreshing message. Um, and I think that, like, if I think we get so caught up on thinking that we have to change, we have to check all these boxes, we have to be all of these things, that I think that sometimes it can cause us to seek out things that are not really who we are. And we keep kind of causing our own suffering by trying to make ourselves fit in places where we don't fit. And so I think that, like, that's the beauty of Buddhism and the beauty of Jodo Shinshu, is that, like, you can just come and be, and if things do need to change in your life, they're going to arise on their own. They're going to come up on their own through hearing the Dharma, through reciting the Nembutsu, and then you can kind of deal with them as they come up and as you kind of work through them. Like, it's not a we're not trying to get to a finish line. We're just trying to, um, be authentically ourselves. So yeah, I think that that would probably be the plug that I would make.
Yeah, yeah, and it fits really well with what you were talking about with your thesis, where you're observing the people that are becoming the nuns that are more or less rejecting their Protestantism, and you're offering as a part of the concluding elements of your thesis. It sounds like that Jodo Shinshu can be something that is available if it's the right fit, because it's meeting you where you're at. Well, thank you so much, Melissa. I really do appreciate you being on, and I wish you the best on Oban. I know that's coming up. I know it's a busy time of year for you.
It's
And
Obon.
Obon, I'm sorry. I'm
Obon.
sorry.
That's okay.
Obon.
Dude, you
And
know how many things I mispronounce on a regular basis? Like, We're in good company. We can help each other out.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Well, and I know it's a big production all the same. So
Yeah.
I wish you the best on that, and I also hope you have fun too.
Yeah.
But
Thank you.
yeah, but thank you again so much for coming by. And I hope to check in with you again soon.
Same. Thanks, Vince. I really appreciate it.